Hello, listeners, and welcome to another episode of Financial Autonomy for Women, the podcast. My name is Maureen Paley. I am a life, career, and financial coach. I work exclusively with women and anyone that has received the gendered conditioning that is typically given towards those assigned the female sex at birth. I am so glad you're here. I'm always glad our listeners are with us. I'm really, really excited about today's episode. Our guest today, we have been trying to get together and make this work for months, quite literally. I think since late 2023. And I'm so excited to have our guest on the show today. Our guest is Asia Evans. And in a moment, I'm going to tell you all about Asia and the work that she does in the financial therapy realm. First, I want to tell you the title of today's episode. Title of today's episode is Financial Therapy Insights for All Stages of Life with Asia Evans. Asia is a licensed mental health counselor, speaker, and author, specializing in financial therapy. With over a decade of experience, Asia is determined to help more people break the taboo of keeping money and emotions secret. In addition to her practice, Asia serves on the board of the Financial Therapy Association, consults with fintech companies, and will be releasing her debut book, Feel Good Finance, and it will be coming out this December 2024. Asia has been featured in a variety of major news outlets, including the New York Times, Business Insider, NerdWallet, CNBC, and Teen Vogue. Asia is on a mission to get more people engaged in living their best lives while attuning to their thoughts, feelings, and behaviors around money. Outside of work, you can find Asia chasing after her two young children as they hunt down the next delicious place to eat. Asia Evans, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you. I'm so happy to be here. And like you said, it's,
Oh,
it's been a long time coming.
we have been working hard at this, and I'm so
Truly.
glad that we're making it happen. So thank you so much. Oh, I have so much to talk. Just your bio alone. I just want to talk about everything in your bio.
Right.
But we do have to find a place to start. So I think the best place for us to start is let's talk a little bit about being a financial therapist. We've had a financial therapist on the show before. That would be Jillian Knight. We talked about financial feminism. I happen to love the discipline and the practice of financial therapy. I'm not one myself, but I would love to hear more about what financial therapy is. Can you tell us?
Sure. So, financial therapy is really focused on how people think, feel, and behave around money, but also their deeper relationship with money. So, really trying to unpack and understand how your life experiences, what you were told, what you heard, what you lived through really impacts your money and what you do with your money and how you feel about it.
It's incredible because you talked about feelings and life events and things like that. And I think a lot of times, we think of money as numbers.
Yes.
And I love what financial therapy does because it says, no, 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 no. It's a bit more than numbers. It's a bit more than getting out the calculator and doing math. There is a life that's being led here, and money is completely integrated and interwoven in those life events.
Exactly. Totally. That's it. And it's so emotional. I think in the past traditional finance information and education has really been around like to your point, it's concrete, it's just numbers. Don't think about it, don't worry about it. It's not money isn't emotional. I'm like, yes, it is. Money is so emotional. And I can't think of anything more emotional than how am I going to support myself? How am I going to make sure I'm okay? How am I going to make sure my family is okay? That is
Mhm.
emotional. So,
It is. It's super emotional. And I really honestly just, not even as a financial professional myself, but just as a human,
yeah.
as someone who, is working with money, just paying my bills and living my life and making things happen day to day. I personally am like so relieved to hear financial therapy professionals really just call this out very plainly. Like money is emotional. We have a relationship with it. It affects every area of our lives. So for me, I find the financial therapy discipline is very much like normalizing that fact for a lot of us.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah, excellent. Okay, so we're going to do something pretty fun and maybe a little different on this episode because I think of therapists. I know you're a mental health clinician and you're also a financial therapist, and those are two separate things. And they, as we mentioned, life events and developmental stages and the way our psychology works through the stages of our life are really important in regards to our relationship with money. So I was hoping that we could go through the decades of adulthood that someone would encounter, 20s, 30s, 40s, 50s, and sharing the insights that you might share maybe with clients, or maybe some of the things that you might have clients keep in mind as they're in those stages of life. And so I was hoping we could start with 20s. I mean, I remember in my 20s, to be quite frankly, I felt in a lot of ways like a hot mess because there was all this adulting to get used
Yeah.
to. I mean, lots of life milestones going on in the 20s. For someone in their 20s, when they're getting used to this adulting, they're probably in debt, it's for something, right?
Yep.
Most of us carry debt. What is the type of things you would ask someone in their 20s to keep in mind so they can, again, kind of respect and also make room for the feelings that come with money as well in your 20s?
Yeah. So, I mean, I happen to have the experience of working with a lot of mid 20 to late 20-year-olds, which is
Mhm.
lovely. And some of my best work that I really, really love and enjoy because it's such a particular time in life. And you're right. I think a lot of us felt like a hot mess in their 20s. And I think a lot of that is because of exactly what you're naming as adulting,
Mhm.
and you go to school or you're getting out of high school and you're transitioning from like 18 into your 20s as this newly minted adult who's supposed to have fully formed thoughts about a life plan and what to do when you're supposed to know everything somehow magically. And I think we almost do our young people, 20-year-olds, a
Mhm.
disservice in thinking that, hey, you're going to be an adult now and now you know, versus how people feel, which is, what am I doing? I just spent 4 years in school or 2 years or 6 or 8, and now I'm out there in the world. Not only what do I do with my money, but how do I do this? And I'm responsible for everything. Like, what happens? So it's just a very messy time. And I think reinforcing that for my clients is really important, and reinforcing for people, you are just starting to figure it out, and that's okay. And you're going to spend a lot of time figuring it out. So let's get the basics, right? Like, let's make sure that you can feed yourself. Let's make sure that you're safe. Let's make sure that you have a home that you feel comfortable in. That is very different than, is my home aesthetically pleasing, which costs money. And I think
Mhm.
that's a lot of times what comes up for 20-year-olds, is that now you are in the world, you are potentially at some of your first few years of working, you're making money and you want to spend it. And I get it because I did too. And I wanted to have a blast and I had a great time, but it also put me in a position where I wasn't doing the financial things that I needed to be doing to set myself up in the future. So that's when it kind of starts talking about, okay, what are the foundations of money? How much information do you have about personal finance? And just getting that financial education foundation so that you're, throwing money into your retirement or 401k or whatnot, and setting it and forgetting it and not worrying about it. But also, like I said, just really relishing in the fact that it's okay that you don't know. You were not supposed to have it all figured out right now. This is trial and error, and trying to figure out what works best for you. That is actually what's most important. What do you need to feel your best? Is it working out? Is it eating well? How many hours of sleep? Taking care of yourself and learning how to do that is going to be the most important thing, as well as listening to yourself. Like, how do you feel?
So much there. I mean, I wish I could have had you helping me, coaching me in my 20s, because that was exactly the voice that I needed. I needed to hear, no, you're not supposed to have this all figure out. Yes, this is hard. And remember that no one taught you this, right? I mean, our families of origin teach us certain things, right? I did get a pretty good foundation with my family of origin, but anybody who gets thrown out into the world in their 20s, they're just getting used to their professional life. They're just getting used to paying the bills. They're
Right.
just getting used to being independent. And a lot of that getting used to is really, you're on shaky ground for a while. And the messaging that we get is, you're supposed to know,
Mm-hmm.
and why don't you know? And why aren't you good at this? And so on and so forth. And we really didn't get that education.
Right. And it's just kind of like, you don't even know what you need to know.
Yeah. Yeah.
Like when you like go out, like, what do I need to know? And it's really just that you said, yes, you're going to go to work, you're going to come home, you have to make sure you take care of yourself, do whatever you do for, zenning out after your work
Mhm.
day, but you don't really understand why it's hard and what the hard is. And that's
Mhm.
the okay, well, now I need to navigate my time and I want to have fun with my friends and I want to spend my money and have a great time. But can I actually go on that trip to Miami for that birthday party? Or now I have to
Mhm.
say no. And that's hard. It's just all of that. And there's a lot of emotion and there's a lot going on. And we're not even sprinkling on the drama of trying to date or if you are dating
Oh yeah.
life milestones. We're just talking about how do I adult and how do I pay my bills? And
Mhm.
that's very complicated.
It is very complicated. And one other thing that you mentioned is like preparing for the future. Like when we're in our 20s, I mean, when I was in my 20s, I'm like, why is anybody talking to me about retirement? Like I am just trying to get my footing right now. I have no idea what I'm going to do when I'm in my 60s. Like who knows? So I couldn't even connect with my future self
Right.
in my 20s. I mean, and understandably, right? It wasn't like a flaw or a defect or anything like that, but it's like when you hear retirement when you're in your 20s, like that doesn't land.
No,
Yeah.
no. And I
Hmm.
wish it was more of like a conversation of like, hey, if you start investing this amount each month now, this is what it will look like later.
Hmm.
Like I needed that.
Oh yes, yes. And
That's the information.
I needed that too. And I have to admit, like I was getting it from certain, entities and maybe from
Mhm.
certain people, but I think like it felt like I was more like, oh my God, I have these student loans to pay. Like I can't like I don't care about that. Like there were far more immediate things to care about. And now that I'm in my 40s and I'm looking back and I'm like, oh yeah, that could have been the fortune that I could have built,
That was it. Yeah, totally.
over these years. So 20s, a lot of adulting to get used to, paying the bills. Also, as you mentioned, figuring out, can I afford these things? I think for a lot of folks in their 20s, maybe folks listening, experiences are super important. And going on that birthday trip or the bachelorette or what have you to Miami or Vegas or you name it. You do want to do that. And it is hard telling the people in your life that you can't. So we talked about the 20s, and I'd love to move into the 30s. This is where I think of like you've established the adulting routine that you've got. You might be also entering into a partnership. There might be a relationship where money is shared. Maybe you're in a committed relationship. Your 30s, once you have like your feet under you, it's a lot of times where people start families and maybe buy their first home. Again, these can happen in other age ranges, but so tell us about that merging of, your financial reality and your emotional reality at that stage of your life.
Yeah, I think 30s are equally as difficult, just different.
Mhm.
Because now, to your point, like you do have a little bit of foundation, you have time, you might be getting promoted in different ways. You might be taking on more of like a manager-esque or director position. So there might be teams underneath you, which leads to a lot of other kind of like emotional navigation with other people that comes up. So
Mhm.
when you look at the financial realities of your life, it might be when I say bigger, I mean that it might require more of your money. So what
Right.
you built in your 20s, you may have been totally comfortable with like, hey, I'm going to have three roommates. We're making it happen. Like we love this life. We're living it. Like we're doing it. But in your 30s, it might be like, you know what? I don't want to live with other people anymore. Now,
Mhm.
how do I reconcile if that is possible or if that is not possible? And to your other point around certain milestones that people go through in their 20s, whether you are committing yourself to a person or you're getting married or you're starting a family or you're buying a home, that looks very different now because of how expensive things are. And people have a lot of internalized feelings around, hey, I'm in my 30s, I'm XYZ age. I should have this. I
Mhm.
should be there. I feel bad that I'm not there. And that's when we kind of have to merge the reality of, hey, A lot of the information that you got around get married, stay at your job for 30 years, buy a house does not apply anymore. Like, this is not the way the world looks for, I'm going to talk about myself and my millennials because I happen to be one. It
Me
just
too.
doesn't look like that, right? So it
Mm-hmm.
it just doesn't look like that.
Mm-hmm.
And that's really hard to reconcile after being raised and having these certain beliefs that if you just can't continue to take these steps forward, it's all going to work out. It's going to be fine. And it will work out, but it may be a little bit different than what you thought it was going to be. Like, you may not be able to afford, the two car garage with the picket fence and, your golden retriever running around with your 2.5 kids. It looks very different, and it's very hard for people to financially afford that, and that can butt up against the vision that they had for their life. So how do you start to navigate, okay, am I happy with my life? Is this okay? Is this what I want it to look like? What do I need to do to get it closer to what I want it to look like? And that's why it's so important to build that financial foundation in your 20s, even though you typically do not know what you're building it for. It really
Mm-hmm.
is so that in your 30s, you're like, okay, I kind of have to pull back on retirement because we have to send little Johnny to daycare and it's very expensive. So,
Mm.
what are we going to do? The work you did in the 20s is going to help you continue to build in your 30s when you may not have the cash, pretty much the cash flow to
Mm-hmm.
be able to do all of the things. It might be that you're taking bigger trips or different trips, or now you're going with multiple people, whether it's just friends or their family. So in your 30s, it really is about, okay, what do I want? Am I comfortable here? What do I need to do? It's very different in terms of, like, for 20s, I feel like it's like looking at the debt, and now 30s, it's like, all right, I still have this debt, or I've paid off some of it and I'm still paying off student loans. And how am I now going to manage these other things in my life that are also really pressing?
Yes, it's different stages of life, different urgencies come about, right? Like you
Yes.
mentioned, different preferences as well. I know myself a little bit better in my 20s. Sure, I'll have all the roommates and, the place will be a mess and so on and so forth. And I don't really need much sleep.
Yep.
Into my 30s, I'm like, oh, sleep is important. Yeah. And my preferences change. Maybe my values get a little bit more clear and solidified. And that registers with me. And that will start driving my decision making with what I do with my money. Something really important that you are sharing, and you share this in the 20s and in the 30s, coming back to ourselves. It's not as you mentioned, a lot of this show is right, financial autonomy for women. It's about myself, my choice, stepping into choice and the freedom and the empowerment that brings. Is it scary? Oh yeah, it can be scary, right? Especially when we're going against the story that we were told that our life would take.
Yep.
And then we start to encounter our life for real. And these stories don't hold up anymore. So I want to recognize what you're suggesting is that we go and we do some introspection about
Yes.
what it is we really want. I find that so empowering just listening to it.
Yeah, I thank you for, like, pulling that out, because I know that my most basic foundation of who I am as a therapist and how I try to show up is I want people to understand their most authentic self, and I want to help support them get to that person. And
Mhm.
you can't get to that person if you don't listen, if you don't know, if you're not taking a pause or taking a step back to be like, do I want this? Or is this somebody else telling me that I want this? Like, I need to make sure that this is something I want for me,
Mhm.
whatever that is. If it is,
Right.
the White House and the picket fence and the 2.5 kids and the two-car garage and the golden retriever, beautiful. I want that for you. But
Mhm.
if it isn't, let's make sure that we're not putting ourselves in that kind of position to potentially be unhappy because that's not what you want. So it's really hard for people to kind of slow down enough to take the time to understand what they really want. And that especially comes with money, because it's so easy to say yes and
Mm.
put your card down when you're like, I really did not want to do that. I did not want to spend on that.
The vision of the life that we're told we're going to have is different from the life that we have. right? And honoring that, I think, is part of like adulthood and maturity.
Yeah.
It's like, yep, yep, this whole thing was supposed to be planned out for you. You were taking the steps and things are different now. And
Totally.
mhm,
Totally.
yeah,
Personally, I thought that I would be able to be an adult and pay off all of my debt and do whatever I wanted to and not feel stressed. And I got everything that I wanted and everything I could have ever dreamed about. And how could I possibly be stressed still? I just did not
exactly.
understand.
How did the math doesn't work? Like what's
Right.
going on here? Yeah, yeah.
Right. It worked. I did it. Like, why
Hmm.
is there stress? And it's just because you're still responsible for yourself and other things. And
Hmm.
time, somehow just gets smaller and smaller and quicker. And you can't do all the things that you want to do in the type of way that you may have thought you could when you were younger.
Okay, so we did our 20s and our 30s. Let's go into the 40s. I am in my 40s and I'm learning so much, honestly, about, about life in general and of course about finances. And something that I find in my 40s is that, I've been in the workforce for 20 years. I actually made the decision to go back to school several years ago. So I took on additional student loan debt. Yeah, which, right. So it's like financially, that
Yeah.
kind of midlife decision was a big one. I knew I was going to be taking it on. I've also purchased a home. That
Yeah.
was a big decision. And so kind of, keeping a lot of plates in the air, but also in a position where I'm like, okay, I know enough about these things where I'm feeling pretty good. The responsibilities are probably, I would say, greater.
Yep.
But I think also maybe what I've learned is helping me meet those responsibilities.
Yep.
And one thing I've also started noticing is like I'm really starting to think about retirement a lot more. I'm like, oh
I feel
yeah,
like you
that
just said
sounds
it all. Yeah. I
good.
think you just said it. And that's exactly what I would say too, that
Yeah.
you know yourself better and
Mhm.
you're less willing to compromise on some of the things that kind of push up against the things that you know that you need.
Yes.
And you're like, no, I'm not going to do that.
Yeah. There's a
And
lot more
feeling
boundaries being set
right.
now. Yeah.
Right. More confident in your boundaries and knowing that
Hmm.
no, I cannot cross them or give them up for somebody else because it really puts me in an uncomfortable place for myself. And I don't want to do that. And
Yeah.
then I was going to say, thinking about retirement more seriously,
Oh,
like for
yes.
whatever, you still have a ton of time, but
Hmm.
it still feels closer. It feels a lot more like, oh, is that the light at the end of the tunnel in terms of
Hmm.
my working life? I can see this. Let's make sure everything's doing okay. What do
Hmm.
I want it to look like for the next years that I'm working? So yeah, I'm like, you said it all right there.
Here's the thing. Remember, like in my 20s, that I couldn't even like retirement. Boy, am I feeling it now.
Yes.
I can see some things that I might want to be doing. I can be like I can actually feel the way I want to feel. And I will be honest, I think this is a bit of a vulnerable share. I have some regrets
Mhm.
about not setting the financial foundation that I could have shared. We can go back in our lives on any issue, not just money, right? And say,
Yep.
well, I could have done this differently, right?
Yep.
To set myself up. That's the nature of regret in life. And so, what would you tell someone who maybe is experiencing some regret looking back in regards to finances?
Me too. And
Yeah.
it's like,
Let's
me too.
normalize this.
Right. Let's
Yeah.
normalize it because I
Uh-huh.
think that's really also really important to me for other people to understand that you are not the only one.
Hmm.
And other people feel that way too. It may
Hmm.
not be for the exact same reason, but people have similar like regrets or looking back and like, I wish, shoulda, coulda, woulda, those kinds of things. So
Hmm.
normalizing that first is really important.
Hmm.
Personally, thank you for sharing. I feel the same way. I wish that I remember cashing out my retirement for one of my jobs. Why did I do that? Like I was like,
Right.
oh, retirement, I got plenty of time. It's fine.
Yeah.
I really look back and I wish that I was putting more money into my retirement in my 20s when I was okay living on less. So
Yes.
bigger
Yeah.
financial regret for me too. So you're not
Hmm.
alone. And then I would say after that, it's okay. Now that we know that you have these regrets, let's make sure that there's no kind of guilt or shame around that because those are two big feelings that need to be attuned to in our money.
Hmm.
After attuning to the potentially attuning to those, then I would say, Are you ready to forgive yourself? Because that's really hard for people to have those regrets and not consistently like beat themselves up for it and go back to it and go back to it. I made this mistake. I have this regret. And I would just ask, are you ready to forgive yourself? And what do you need to do to help yourself move on from this? Yes, there are the concrete things like, okay, can you double up on your retirement? Can you double up on that payment to get out of debt quicker? Are you willing to sacrifice certain things? Like there are the concrete, more number things, but
Yes.
I'm always here for the feelings
Hmm.
because that's kind of the side of financial therapy that I sit on, mostly the emotional
Hmm.
is okay. Yes, you're right. You know, it would have been better for you financially now if you had done it then. But what do you need to do to move on? What do you need to do to forgive yourself? And can you forgive yourself? And it can just be like that's a little wound, that's a bruise if you will,
Hmm.
but I'm still strong and I can move on and I know I can compensate for maybe not doing it that way before.
Yeah. Oh, whew, I'm glad I shared the vulnerability because everything that you said really just landed. Like I could feel it in my heart, honestly.
Mhm.
Like, are you ready to forgive yourself? Because, by personally speaking, I have a track record of really being hard on myself, as most people do, right? Like just really like I saying the things to myself that I would never say to a friend.
Yep. Yep.
And so appreciate it's like here's the thing. You're right. I can take the actions to like compensate for that regret, but then I could also just forgive myself.
Yep.
Or I could maybe it's not like, okay, I'm just going to forgive myself. You don't just say it and it happens. There is an emotional trajectory to forgiveness and to letting go of
Yes.
what could have been, right?
Yeah, totally. And releasing it. And
Hmm.
that is really hard. And for some people, they need to like do something, right? Like if you're
Yes.
writing a letter or, whatever it may be, there are
Hmm.
tons of things like
Hmm.
meditation, going on a trip, going on a hike to the top of the summit and being like, okay, I release it here. I did it, like
Hmm.
I'm forgiving myself. One thing that I've done in the past when I turned 30, I like released my 20s at the ocean. Like
Oh.
I went to the water and I sat, it's September, so the water was getting a little cold, but
Hmm.
I put my feet in the water and I was like, Asia, you did it. Like you made it through your 20s, you are understanding yourself, release it. So for some
Hmm.
people, having a sort of kind of like a ritual with it can be
Hmm.
really helpful to kind of release some of that feeling. But it's really important because you're right. Like it's not as simple as, okay, yeah, I forgive myself. Let's move on. No,
Hmm.
that doesn't sound like forgiveness to me.
Agreed. It demands far more from us, and rightfully so, if it's going to be real and if it's going to have an impact. Let's move on to our 50s. I look at the 50s, and also 40s into 50s. Again, retirement you can see it on the horizon even clearer, right? If you're someone who is a parent, like if you've had children, maybe in your 50s, this is where your children are entering their teenage years or maybe even approaching college. So you're trying to maybe potentially financially accommodate education needs. Also, you might have older parents yourself or older relatives that need care. So, not only is that a financial responsibility up the generations to your parents, down the generations to your children potentially, it's also an emotional investment, right? I mean,
Yes.
that's the sandwich generation experience. Usually that will be happening in your 50s, and that can be a really tough time. And then you're trying to, like, again, keep the plate spinning in the air, keep everything in balance because you still want to get to that goal of retirement. So there's a lot going on in the 50s too.
Right, exactly. And what I would say then, and I want to also give this caveat too, especially for women, please be aware of what's going on in your financial house. Please be aware of where the money is, where the accounts are. Do you have access to the money? Know what's in them, know what debts they may like you may have. Like if your partner not partnered, whatever, please do
Mhm.
not like stick your head in the sand. You have to know what's going on. And I would say in the 50s, like that is a really, really important thing. Nobody wants anything to happen to anybody. I want everybody to live healthy and be okay forever and ever. But
Mhm.
unfortunately, that is not the case for many people. And tragedies do happen and people pass away, and it's sad, especially if you're also dealing with elderly parents. You need to know what's going on in their financial lives, if that's going to be somewhat of a potential responsibility for you. So being aware of what's happening financially is going to be, it's important throughout all generations and decades of your life, but I think in your 50s it's like imperative. Like I cannot stress that enough,
Yeah.
because you don't want to get to, whatever retirement age may be for you, 55, 60, 65, and be like, well, oh, I was putting in for retirement, but I don't know where it is. I don't have access to it. Like, you just need to know. So that's one really important point that I want to really stress and drive home for people, because it's real and people end up in really awful situations because they don't know where the money is.
Thank you for bringing this up. Getting our financial houses in order. It is so easy to stick our heads in the sand. And I just want to like go ahead and say it's not because, again, it's not a personal defect that you want to stick your head in the sand. This is the nature of the human condition.
Right.
We are seeking to avoid the challenging,
Yep.
suffering aspects of life and seeking more of the rewards, right? So I often, liken it to, hey, stepping into the truth of what your money is doing and what the financial situation is, it is a big, scary spotlight. It's going to show all those wounds, all those ugly bits. It is going to be painful. And the pain, thankfully, hopefully, will be temporary because the reward will be longer and more certain for you in regards to, I really found out what's going on with my money so then I could really take the best decisions. Because if we don't look at what's going on, if we stick our head in the sand, we can't make the best decisions for ourselves.
Totally. Exactly. And it's really important because now it's happening, right? Like retirement is coming, you see it, and it might be happening sooner than later. So it's just really important to know what's going on, and also know like, hey, what do I want these years to look like for myself? Again, I'm going inward again.
Mhm.
I am who I am. Every decade there's something, but really thinking about like, hey, as I prepare for potential retirement, as I prepare for my children to not be living with me anymore, or to be going off to school, or to get married, or whatever it is that's happening in your life, or taking care of elderly family members, what do you want this to look like? Am I paying attention to my body? Am I taking care of myself? Am I getting enough movement? Am I making sure that my health is also okay too? And I think it's really easy in your 30s and in your 40s to neglect yourself, especially if you are a caregiver or a parent, because
Mm.
you're so busy worrying about somebody else. But then I think in your 50s, when your time is kind of coming back to your own in a bigger way, it's definitely time to be like, okay, am I taking care of myself? What do I need? What do I want? What do I potentially like? What's on your bucket list? What do you potentially want to be doing? I just think that's really, really important. And we potentially could talk about it in their 60s, but what I worry about for people so much is that you get to retirement, you don't know how to spend your money. You spend all this time like squirreling away your retirement, and now you're like, oh, I have to spend it now. Yes. Like,
Look how much
enjoy
there
your
is.
money,
Yeah.
right? Enjoy it. And
Mhm.
sometimes that takes a little practice before you get there. So if you haven't figured out how to spend and enjoy your money, of course, don't like put yourself in a financially precarious situation. But if you're saying like, hey, I have dreamed about going to Italy and I really want to go. Like,
Right.
go. Do the
Yeah.
things that you have wanted to do and that you dreamed of doing.
Some of us need that permission, right? To give ourselves permission, like, especially when you're entering into getting closer to retirement. And maybe some people are ultra conservative with their funds and they're like, I can't do that because it might run out. Sure. There are limited resources. That is a reality. And sometimes it's a matter of, I do have the resources and I am going to make this decision for the quality of life impact that I'm hoping it'll give me.
Right. Exactly. I
Yeah.
think it's so important.
Yeah, and I think a couple things that you mentioned that I want to touch on, especially in regards to like getting our financial house in order and the potential of losing someone, right? As we get older, loss is inevitable all
Yes.
our lives, and even more so as we get older. I often look at, losing someone is hard enough, whether that's through death, through someone's passing, through an illness, through a divorce or a separation or something like that. It's hard enough emotionally. You add in the financial aspects and the uncertainties that can come with that. Oh my goodness. And the good thing is that there are ways to make sure that to mitigate the financial, I don't want to say drama, but that like the confusion and the stress that can come with the finances, right? Making sure you assign beneficiaries, making sure if you need to be assigned as a beneficiary, having the tough conversations about what do you want, maybe with your parents or even yourself or your partner, what is the end of life going to look like and what do we want it to look like? And, those are tough conversations to have. And what the benefit we give ourselves is that we have them when we're healthy
Yep.
and we are top of mind, we're like, and we kind of set the stage and we let people know what our wishes are and they let us know what their wishes are so that everybody's clear, so that when something does happen,
Yep.
we don't have to feel confused or torn up because it's
Yeah,
already been made
totally.
clear.
Totally. And I just had, and my mom is in her 60s, and I just had this like almost exact conversation. I was like, Mom, we have to talk about something a little morbid right now, and I'm sorry, but
Mhm. Mhm.
I know like my positioning for you and like what your wishes are, but like where are the documents? Like where
Yes, I
are the
need to know where they're at. Yep.
right? Like I need to
Mhm.
know. And she said, she's like, honestly, Asia, thank you for asking because I remember she was referring to my grandmother, but she's like, when
Mhm.
grandma died, I had no idea where
Mhm.
anything was. So I had to like comb through the house to get everything. And she's like, and it really made me put my own grieving on pause because I had to like execute, like I had to do
Yes,
things.
get stuff
And
done.
right. And I
Hmm.
just that was so meaningful to me that we had that kind of conversation and just generationally, she's like, so for me, like I don't want you to have to be like combing through my stuff. Here, this is where it is. This is all the documents that are in there. And then also she's like, not that I'm going anywhere anytime soon. I am healthy, everything's fine. She's like, but I also want to be purging and downsizing because I don't want you to have to be going through decades of stuff. And she's like, and grandma was a little bit of a hoarder. She loved clothes. So she's like, so there was a lot to go through, but I don't want you to have to, put your grief aside or pause it because you're still going through like literally going through like an untouched home
Yeah.
where, people have just been living for the last like 30, 40 years, which is beautiful and the memories, but it's a lot of work.
Hmm.
So purge.
It's a yes, yeah. Travel light if you can. And one other thing before we move into 60s and 70s that I want to check in on is you've been emphasizing the importance of our bodies
Mhm.
and taking care of our bodies. And sometimes when we talk about money, we kind of equate our lives to the balance in our checking account or
Yep.
it's like we're not just this isn't just dollars and cents. We walk around, we live in these bodies that need care, that need rest, that need movement. So tell us about what have you noticed as the connection between our financial health and our bodily health?
Yeah. So, I mean, I literally just had this conversation yesterday, and it was honestly a breakthrough for me. And I was just talking about how difficult it is to process your relationship with your money when you are not listening to yourself.
Yes.
So, like, if you're not, and when I say listening to yourself, like, yes, I'm talking about your most authentic self. Yes, I'm talking about your voice, but I'm also like, are you attuned to your own like feelings, like in your body? So, a perfect example is when we were talking about avoiding your money. If you are like putting your head in the sand and avoiding it, do you know why or what's coming up for you that like kind of pushes you to avoidance? Are you feeling anxious?
Mhm.
Do you feel like you don't know? Are you feeling unsure? So you're like, I'm too scared. I don't want to do it. But that requires you to be in touch of what's going on in your like within yourself. Are you starting to sweat? Is your heart racing? Are you like
Mhm.
having trouble breathing? Are you not sleeping? So all of that is your body. You need to know what you're feeling to then be able to decide like, all right, let me make this financial move, or this is what's coming up for me. So it's really hard, and I really want to like continue like working in this like understanding, but it's really hard. What I'm finding is for people who aren't aware of their
Mm.
bodies, almost like disconnected from their bodies, disconnected from how they're feeling, to
Yes.
then start paying attention to their money, because they're also disconnected from their money, and trying to fuse those together gets really complicated if you don't know what's happening in your body.
Yeah, I have kind of learned this the hard way. Like, and society and our conditioning and capitalism, you name it, it's going to teach us to ignore your body and just go with your productivity, right? And just do the things and do the things and be in the grind. For me, when it's certain stages of my cycle, especially the last week leading up to my period, I will remind myself, don't make any big decisions this week, because what's going on right now, you're just
Yeah.
trying to nourish yourself and trying to manage this week. That's all you're doing. You don't need to make any big decisions.
Right.
After a crummy night's sleep, I need to take a full day and get a better night's sleep, but again, before I make any bigger decisions. So knowing our bodies is super important. I want to move to the 60s and 70s. I know that we're kind of like lumping them together, but I think they do deserve their own separate comments. But for 60s and 70s, we're moving into retirement. We've squirreled away the money. We maybe we haven't. And a lot of adjustment to leaving the work life and moving into retirement. So what can we share with people about that stage of life?
Please know what your hobbies are. Like, please know like what your life looks like if it is not centered around work. So
Yes.
that may be, are you taking on different roles within your family? Are you getting involved with your community? Like, I think it's really important that people have hobbies and enjoyable hobbies that they like. So taking the time to kind of cultivate them
Mhm.
throughout, and in preparation of what am I going to do when I retire? What am I going to do when I am not working anymore? And I find that people enjoy retirement more when they are doing other things. Like, I think there's this idea that we all just kind of want to, oh, I want to retire so I don't have to do anything. So I can just sit
Mhm.
around and do whatever I want. Yes. And there's a time
Mhm.
and a place for that, but that cannot be forever. So figuring out like, hey, what is this going to look like? How do I build community? And and then it really is about health to me. Like, how do you maintain health so that you can do the things, you can cross off the things off your bucket list? And movement is a part of that. Listening to your body is a part of that. Being in community and having either families, social, religious community, like you name it, like hobby community, whatever. But
Yes.
having other people, I think is really, really, really important.
Yeah. And all the more important to in your 20s, 30s, 40s, 50s, do the math to set yourself up, because all the things, being in community, having your hobbies, living your best life, bucket list stuff, they're going to have a dollar value to them. Um,
100%. And that's
yeah.
why, right? That's why we're
Mhm.
saying in your 20s, set
And
yourself
yep.
up. So
Yeah.
when in your like older self, 60s and 70s, you're like,
Hmm.
wow, thank you, past me, for really
Hmm.
caring about this present me.
Yeah.
Because now I can do these things. Now I am okay. Now I'm in my house and the house is paid off, or I'm comfortable in this apartment or where I live,
Hmm.
or I am going to take that trip to Italy. Whatever it looks like, it's just really
Hmm.
important for future you that you were taking care of yourself.
And I love what you said in the 20s. You're like, you may not know what it's for,
Mhm.
but it will come in handy, right? So it's kind of like a little bit of a leap of faith. Oh my goodness, Asia, we covered so much, and I'm so grateful that you got to be here. Yeah, thank you so much for talking with us, and we're very much looking forward. I'm can't wait to buy your book coming out in December. Tell us the title one more time.
Feel Good Finance. So it'll be out December 3rd, but it is on pre-order. So you can go wherever you get your books, so whether that's Barnes and Noble, Amazon, and you can order it there. Feel Good Finance.
I love it. It's time to feel good about our finances. And for everybody listening, I'm going to have all of Age's information in the show notes. So make sure to get that book on pre-order. Thank you so much again. And for our listeners, as always, with your finances, be kind to yourself seek support when you need it, and let me know how it goes. We'll see you next time.